So, welcome everyone to this Managing Stress and the Emotional Impact of Cancer presentation by Jeanice Hansen, who is our Support Services Program Director. I'm Janine Smith. I am what am I? I'm the Program Specialist. I've had a couple titles with Colorado Gynecologic Cancer Alliance, and I'm just helping Jeanice here at the moment. But I'll be listening in as well as a cancer survivor myself. We are recording this program tonight, but I do want you to know that your face and your name are not being recorded. We will ask you to stay muted during the presentation. If you have questions or comments, please put them in the chat. I'll be monitoring that. And then also we will send out a recording, a link to the recording from our YouTube channel to you in the next couple of days. Jeanice, I'll try to get that done tomorrow morning. So I think that's pretty much it. I do just want to mention one other quick thing for those of you who don't know, and I'm betting that you all do. So Jeanice oversees our Nikki Circle support groups as well, and we also have individual counseling for those who are gynecologic cancer survivors. And do keep in mind we have other programs as well, including our Carol's Wish Financial and Insurance Navigation Program. So if you have any questions about any of the programs that we provide, please visit gyncancercolorado.org, gyncancercolorado.org. Or you can certainly reach out to me or to Jeanice if you need any information about any of our programs that we're very proud to provide. So I think that's the housekeeping.
Sounds perfect. Thank you,
Right.
Janine.
Thank you. Oh, there we go. Sorry. I don't want to be here. Jeanice, we're not hearing you for some reason.
Okay, there we go. Can you hear
There
me
you
now?
are. Thank you.
All
Sorry, that
right.
may have been my doing. I don't know.
All right. Well, sounds good. We're all glad that you're here. And Janine will be monitoring the chat. So as the slides and the presentation proceeds, I'll have her check in with the chat and let me know what you're all saying. But for now, we'll just go ahead and begin, and then we'll have a question and answer segment at the end. So welcome. As we are all facing changes in our life, and we're all experiencing stress along the way, and each of those stressors has an emotional impact. And so as we face all these changes related to living with a cancer diagnosis, it's important to tend to our emotional and mental well-being as well as our physical health. So today we'll begin to talk about what that means, and we'll explore what stress is, how it affects the body, the emotions it triggers, behaviors that follow, and what we can do to actually modify the impact on our mental and emotional well-being. Because a lot of times it can be quite overwhelming. We're feeling so many things physically and emotionally that it's hard to know what we do with all of that. So this is a big topic, and we won't be able to cover everything about it in one session. My hope is that this webinar will offer you a better understanding of how stress affects your brain and your body, and why it's important to take it seriously when thinking about your overall health. And we'll talk about some of the big emotions that often arise. In addition, we'll list some evidence-based strategies that can help you feel better mentally and physically. There's a lot to consider, so be easy on yourself. If you only take away a few things to help you today, that will be enough. You can always explore this topic more deeply with friends, a therapist, or a support group. Before we begin, let's take a moment to help you relieve some of the tension and anxiety that I imagine you came here with today. Simply place one hand over your heart and one over your belly, or both over your heart if you prefer. And focus on the warm sensation of your hands. Slowly take a deep breath in through your nose. Release a deep sigh out through your mouth. And notice the movement, sound, and temperature and sensations you feel with that. With the next inhale, send a gentle, compassionate message of hope to yourself, such as, may I be happy, may I be at peace. It doesn't have to be anything long, just a phrase that expresses what you hope for yourself in this moment. Let's take at least a couple more breaths like that. Deep breath in through your nose, a nice kind affirmation, and exhale slowly through your mouth. One more. And allow to notice if your shoulders are dropping a little bit farther away from your ears and that you're actually feeling yourself sinking into your chair and allowing yourself to relax for just a little while, maybe longer. So you may experience different levels of stress and emotional intensity as you move through your cancer experience. And these are some of the most common sources of that stress. When you look at this list, which ones of these have been the most stressful for you? And this is a time when you can enter them in the chat. Maybe there are others that you would like to add to the list, and that's okay too. Enter those in the chat. As you know, these are intensified by the emotions that accompany them, and they need your attention too. Jeanine, are you noticing any common threads with regard to what people are saying about those stressors?
Absolutely. Well, I'll say the only response we have at this moment, and I want to say if anyone agrees with this, you can raise your hand, look at the bottom, where you'll see a little hand. It would be recurrence. And then we do have
Yeah.
the effectiveness of treatment, which I'm sure is very much related to the
Mhm.
fear of recurrence.
Yes, very much so. We'll keep posting those if you like, and we'll take that information forward because it matters with regard to how you respond to stress and what those sources of stress are for you. Excuse me. So this diagram represents other things that might fuel your stress. You know, the cancer doesn't occur in a vacuum. We're in the middle of life with children, work, other demands on our time and our attention. So when these are added to the cancer diagnosis, it's not surprising that it doesn't take much for you to feel distressed and demoralized. And this prolonged stress often leads to anxiety and depression, which are normal. It depends on the intensity and the duration of it that makes a difference. So while stress is a normal part of life and generates normal physiological responses, it poses a greater threat to your health and well-being when it becomes a sustained emotional and physical state without relief or release. That's when it becomes distress. And research has revealed that chronic stress can lead to physiological wear and tear on your body that is linked to a lower survival rate and a poor response to treatment. That's why reducing the impact of stress is necessary and important part of cancer treatment and survivorship. However, it's important to clarify that stress and chronic stress didn't cause your cancer. A weakened immune system becomes susceptible to any type of illness or chronic condition, and genetics and environmental factors also play a part in that. So be kind to yourself. Recognize that even though you're feeling stressful now, you have some options that you can mitigate that stress. We can't avoid it altogether. Stress is cancer, or I'm sorry, cancer is stressful. So notice the things that are listed on this slide with regard to what it is that is affecting you at this time. How is your stress level? For many cancer survivors and those who love them, the diagnosis and treatment of cancer is traumatic. So that's why this particular slide talks about how trauma impacts the brain. While neurobiology of trauma is an extensive field of study in itself, let's take a simplified look at what's happening in the brain when we experience these intense emotions and stress. It generates emotional and physical responses that can be temporary or chronic. Again, stress is normal. So we have experiences where we have more stress, no stress, or just a little bit of stress, depending on what's happening. This response, when we have the strong response and reaction to stress, it hijacks our amygdala. It's called the amygdala hijack in other kinds of publications. You might have heard about it. And when this happens, other parts of the brain go offline, including the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus. These are regions of the brain that are critical for managing stress resilience. And when our amygdala, down here, hijacks our brain, we feel intense emotions about a situation before we can think about it. In other words, we feel before we think. And when that happens, we develop a pattern of emotional reasoning that's not helpful. In other words, we're thinking that because I feel anxious, I must not be safe. And as you know, the feeling could be misguided in the sense that we are responding to just what we feel, but not the facts of the situation or the environment. So, fortunately, there are ways to soothe this response, but it takes practice. So, we'll talk about how to do that in a little bit later. One of the important takeaways of this particular diagram is that when the amygdala gets fired up and hijacks us, these particular parts of our brain are going offline. So that makes sense in terms of when you're highly stressed, it's really difficult for you to make decisions. It's really difficult to remember things. And that you have a difficulty of differentiating what's happening now versus memories of what's happened before. This is especially relevant when you think about scanxiety. You remember what it was like for those initial scans. And so when future scans are scheduled or are happening, or you're waiting for the results, you remember what that feels like. And so it's a matter of how we then focus our attention, whether it's in the present or in the past. So, in addition, it's very helpful to understand the physiology of the stress response so you can recognize what's happening in your body. Emotions and stress impact your entire nervous system. Calming your nervous system helps mitigate this, and that occurs on this side of the parasympathetic nervous system. So it's important to remember that our nervous system is always listening, constantly receiving communications from our body. Remember, we feel before we think. So we have the sensation in our body before we really understand what's happening. So the goal here is to bring communication from our body into our awareness. So your body is always listening, and it doesn't know the difference between a real or imagined thought. For example, if I were to ask you to bite into a very sour lemon or tart lemon, for a lot of people, just that imagination generates their saliva glands and their mouth starts to water. Or you're thinking of your favorite foods and how your mouth might water as a result of that. So, again, whether the item is actually there or not, your body just does what you're telling it about. So pay close attention to the parasympathetic nervous system responses that we talk about here that are listed here because we'll be referring to them more a little bit later. So what we also know is that trauma hides in our body until we finally feel safe enough to notice it and begin to heal it. So remember, we feel before we think, and when we are feeling without understanding what it's coming from, that gets stored in our body. So our body keeps the score. There's actually a book with that title. The body keeps a score of every unhealed emotional wound. So we might experience autoimmune flares, fatigue, gut issues, migraines, pain, even the way we breathe or sleep are not random. They're the body's way of telling the story of our survival. Now, central to all of this is the vagus nerve, a major player in mitigating our stress response. It controls the body's rest and digest response. Remember that on the parasympathetic side of our nervous system? And it's one of the longest nerves in our body. It starts in the brainstem and extends all the way down through the neck and into the abdomen. Now, the vagus nerve is a key component for the parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for regulating bodily functions that occur at rest, such as heart rate, digestion, and relaxation. And interestingly, 80% of the information is traveling through the pathways from the abdomen or gut to the brain, and only 20% is coming back down. So that again illustrates that we feel things in our body before we can make sense of them or understand where they're coming from. So when we experience traumatic events, we often react without thinking about it and may not even realize we're doing it. You may have heard of Dr. Gabor Mate. He's written a lot of books and is also a well-known expert on stress and trauma. Does a lot of presentations you can find online. And he explains trauma this way. Trauma is not what happens to you, but what happens inside of you as a result of what happened to you. Let me say that again. Trauma is not what happens to you, but what happens inside you as a result of what happened to you. So that's the meaning, the beliefs, internal responses that we assign to the event or the experience. And when this trauma is stored in the body and nervous system, it's often revealed in behaviors that are described here. You may be familiar with some of them, but there may be a couple that are not as commonly known, but are existent. So before we begin, it's important to remember that these behaviors are not moral failings. You were just protecting yourself, and they were an effective way for your brain and body to protect you from a real threat. Yet the perceptions that created them keep us tied to the past and may no longer be true or serve us very well in the present. These behaviors reveal to us what needs to be healed. So let's look at them a little more closely than the initial diagram. So the fight of response has to do with a really aggressive stance in the sense of protecting ourselves, where we outwardly confront any danger or threat. But this behavior could come across as being very reactive to criticism, being very argumentative, pushing people away. It can involve a lot of physical responses where we're throwing things, acting aggressively may physically initiate a fight. And then there's one that we also are familiar with. We want to run away from the flight or from the fight. We want to run away from the threat and not fight it because we don't feel like we're capable of doing that. And this is where we feel a lot of anxiety and panic. We just want to get away. The interesting piece about the flight response is that it involves a lot of avoidance overall. So this is where we might immerse ourselves in activities that are a distraction. We want to escape what's uncomfortable, especially when the emotions come up that leave us feeling so vulnerable. I once heard the phrase that, emotions can't catch up to a moving target. And so as long as we keep moving and busy, we don't allow ourselves to actually feel what's happening. And then the freeze response, we're familiar with that one as well, in terms of where we just shut down, we are immobilized, we can't take action and we can't run away, we don't know what to do. So in this particular response, we are feeling numb, we're having a sense of sort of lost, slowed down time, and we really, again, are not able to act on whatever the threat might be. Now, these two, the fawn and the flop, are not as well known. The fawn is what you might liken to a bit of people pleasing in the sense that when we see someone who is really upset with us, our tendency might be to do whatever we can to appease them. This often happens in relationships where there might be some violence or abuse, where we do our best to try to calm the other person down. We feel responsible for their intense emotions and behaviors, and so we want to do whatever we can to appease them. And so this might be where we put other people's needs above our own. And we might not even know what our own needs are because we're constantly scanning the environment for, is everyone else okay? And then the flop is a complete shutdown. So this is the sense of where we might actually faint. We're so overwhelmed that we just can't feel anything. And it's emotionally exhausting and we just shut down. It's just too much. What's important to keep in mind, though, is that although all of these behaviors are options with regard to response to stress, the ones that are really harmful to others and ourselves still is not an excuse for continuing those behaviors. We still have the responsibility to heal them and do what we can to be able to understand what's behind it and be able to take care of ourselves for our own well-being and that of others. So I want to point out here that there's a difference between stress and stressors. So removing or distracting ourselves from the cause of stress does not erase the impact of stress on our brain and our bodies. So essentially that means, you can leave a stressful situation, but the impact that it had on you stays with you. This is often seen when treatment ends, where people think, oh, I'm done. I don't have to revisit that experience anymore. I got through it and now I'll just move on. Where what we know is, even though treatment's done, the experience isn't. We carry all of that still with us. And so when our stress response stays turned on, it actually increases our sensitivity to that stressor. So even a little bit of that exposure can trigger us. Therefore, we need to complete the stress cycle in healthy ways. Drugs, alcohol, constant checking our phone, mindless social media, and throwing ourselves into work may seem to work in the short term, but not in the long term. So let's look at some evidence-based strategies that can help us complete the stress cycle. But before that, I just want to go into this a little more detail with regard to we experience the external stress. We have, and so remember, we feel that physically first. There's some internal appraisal that says it's dangerous. We have a physiological response first, remember, we feel it before we can actually think about it. And so we can activate any of these responses. It happens very quickly, it's not conscious. And then the rest, the other side, the parasympathetic side of our response system and nervous system begins to shut down. It's mobilizing all of that energy into the stress response, fight, flight, freeze, whatever, which is usually more intensive with regard to drawing our resources. So then we consciously become aware of it in terms of, oh, we notice our stomach's upset. We know we're shaking. We know that we are finding ourselves maybe sweating more, whatever it might be. And then we have a choice to make. What do we do with that? And that's where the coping strategies come in, and that's where we complete the stress cycle. So when we continue to have these stressors, but we don't do anything to relieve our body or allow our body to rest and restore, we just stay in this cycle and we don't get any relief. And so the importance is to be aware that when all of that happens, we have some options with regard to how we can complete the stress cycle and bring it back down. If you think of a bell curve where you sort of have this sense of you're just kind of going along and then this major stressful event occurs, when it stays up here and it's sustained for long periods of time, all kinds of things are happening in our body. We saw on that other slide with regard to heightened cortisol levels, our immune system gets suppressed. And if we don't do anything that actively brings that stress level back down, we're actually creating a situation in which our body is having a hard time resting and repairing itself. So completing the stress cycle helps create flexibility in our response to stress. And so here's some common options to consider for yourself, and you can see which ones might be a good fit for you. Connecting with friends, very important. Our social system doesn't have to be huge, but it has to have good quality. So even having just a few friends that are really close that you trust and can be with at times of stress. Having a good belly laugh, of course, you can't be anxious and laughing at the same time. It's the sense of where do we actually put our energy. There's actually laughing yoga is another option that fits under that category. So we also can get creative, put ourselves into some activities that are maybe painting or playing the piano or dancing, whatever it might be, that also, whoops, lets us have, I'm not sure why that's showing up here. There we go. So that we can have the opportunity to not distract ourselves in an unhealthy way that keeps us from experiencing any emotion, but allowing ourselves to really express our self creatively. So a different kind of energy and emotion is moving through us that is more calm. Obviously, hugs. Not everybody is a hugger, I know that. But the physical touch, the kind, tender, safe touch, is often very calming for a lot of people. And hugs release oxytocin, which is the calming hormone. So having a good cry, sometimes we just got to let it out and being able to release it. I often will say, crying is a way to let our heart breathe, the sense of moving, that letting that emotion move through us. Breathing, there's lots of research with regard to breath work and the ability to help calm our nervous system. Here's a link. You'll get a copy of these slides, and so you'll have access to these links. But 478 breathing is one that's very helpful, and it's also often used to help with sleep. So if you're feeling especially anxious and you want to be able to relax enough that you can go to sleep, the short version of it is you inhale for 4 through your nose, you hold for 7, and you exhale slowly for a count of 8. And all of this works best with what they call diaphragmatic breathing. It means breathing in your belly. Janine, you probably can relate to this as a singer in terms of how you sing best is with your diaphragm. So a lot of times people will start these breathing exercises by exhaling fully, and then when they breathe in, they feel their belly fill up like a balloon. And then when they exhale, that belly comes down, and you're actually then engaging the diaphragm rather than breathing just from the top of your chest. Now, some other options might be yoga and Tai Chi or Qigong. You might also try a mindfulness meditation. Lots and lots of research is out there with regard to how mindfulness meditation makes a difference. The focus of it is it brings you into the present. Remember, trauma often relies on memories of the past and those emotional wounds from the past. And mindfulness meditation does a couple things, brings you into the present, allows you to be an observer of your thoughts. So rather than feeling like you're the thinker that has all the facts, you have a sense to examine it where you can say, oh, that's what I'm thinking. Is that helpful or not? And I'll just say a little bit more about thoughts, and we'll come up to it again a little bit later. Is that we have this interesting experience as human beings? Is when we think a thought, is we automatically believe it's true. And so having the opportunity to begin to observe and examine our thoughts gives us an opportunity to then say, is that true? Is that helpful? So as we go forward, that will be a key component also. Singing, chanting, humming, those all activate that vagus nervous system with regard to helping us relax. So use what's helpful for you. Choose the ones that you feel are going to be most useful, most accessible. And I will tell you though, that it's so important to practice these more than once. Some people will say, oh, I tried that, it didn't work. Well, we are really overcoming some challenging natural, normal, automatic responses to stress that we really have to create a new pathway for. And so these give you a conscious option to be able to do that. So we all have bad days, and having a toolkit of these options helps us get through them instead of just allowing them to swallow us whole. Interestingly, new research shows that 20 seconds of daily self compassion lowers anxiety. 20 seconds, oh my gosh, it doesn't take very long. It takes longer to heat up your coffee. So, allowing yourself to actually be kind to yourself just for 20 seconds a day is so powerful, very powerful. And if you can try that for at least 30 days, you're going to see a very noticeable difference. Again, we talk to ourselves more than we talk to anybody else. And so what we say to ourselves is so critical because it's critical in a good way, important in a good way, because it gives us an opportunity to actually say to ourselves maybe the things that we haven't heard from others. You know, we have enough critics in the world who will judge whether we're doing things well enough or right enough. But we don't need to add to that. We don't need to be another critic and someone else who is unkind to us. So, also 10 minutes of self care and compassion a day is also really powerful with regard to helping us know that we're restoring ourselves. Remember, activating that parasympathetic part of our nervous system. And I will say too that we can't have self care if we don't have self compassion. They just are not mutually exclusive. They really go together. We have to start with the desire that we're worth it, and then we do it. So this compassion helps lower our stress hormones, lessen the impact of stress, improve our mood. So why not try this? Of course, again, it's not a one and done. We have to practice it because we are needing to learn this new behavior. We're creating neural pathways. And I just want to say a little bit about motivation here. Sometimes we often resist doing these things, anything that's good for us, because we don't feel like it, right? So this again is that example of what we were talking about earlier of emotional reasoning is not helpful. Just because we don't feel like doing something that's good for us should not be the reason we don't do it. So we have to actually consciously overcome that. So it's normal to experience stress and anxiety and low mood during difficult times, but when intense and sustained, these emotions can drain our mental capacities and resources. They overwhelm our ability to cope and significantly affect our daily life or quality of life. For many survivors, a cancer diagnosis is traumatic. It's a traumatic experience that just stays with us and has a long lasting negative impact on our mental and emotional well being well after the diagnosis and treatment is completed. And it can be easily triggered by anything that references or recalls memories of that experience. And in addition, guilt, shame, anger, those all carry their own emotional charge. And there's a lot of work or research, I should say, on all of these. If you're familiar with Brene Brown, she is a premier researcher on the impact of shame, especially for women. So let's look at these emotions a little bit more closely. So, anxiety is probably the most common emotion we feel when we hear the word cancer and get immersed in a world of medical terminology we don't understand and treatments that feel awful, and especially when we're forced to face our own mortality. However, anxiety has a purpose to prepare and protect us. It can also derail us, though. So, you can see here what the benefits might be, but also when we suffer from anxiety in its intense form, we find that at least half of our survivors are experiencing cancer anxiety. I often hear it as I talk with people, especially at the beginning of their journey, and often throughout. It can be as anxiety provoking when treatment ends because we have a whole different set of worries with regard to who's monitoring our body now. How do I know if there's a recurrence? What if it does come back? We have so many scenarios that are playing through our mind that the anxiety can persist. Now, PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder is also likely or probable in about 15 or 16% of the people who are dealing with gynecologic cancer. Now, this is influenced by a number of things, and we'll talk a little bit about those in the next slide. But it's important to know that women who have had a history of trauma actually have a higher risk, a 2 times risk of ovarian cancer. And I will tell you that when I talk to a lot of women and we're talking about what's happened before in their lives, often this comes up that there was some significant trauma in their life beforehand. That's also true for breast cancer. So, again, you think about it that when trauma is affecting our body and reducing the effectiveness of our immune system, we can get serious illnesses. Some can be minor. You know what it's like when you're really run down and you're more likely to get a cold or the flu or cold sores. Well, this is, you know, intensified with regard to traumatic experiences. Our immune system really takes a hit. And of course, it leaves us feeling awful. We have all of these symptoms. And the biggest one that I hear about too is just mentally, I can't make sense of things. I can't remember things. And it's also hard then for us to ever believe or accept that we have enough information. There's always this burning desire that there must be more. We go down the rabbit hole of Dr. Google, and we don't know how to sort out what really applies to us or not. So we think it all does. And it really begins to create even more stress. And it creates havoc on our life. So it's not surprising that when we do have more stress and we are experiencing in our body, that we're going to have more pain, especially when we have any kind of symptom with our side effects. A lot of times those are exacerbated the more stressed we are. And so again, the importance of really finding a way to complete that stress cycle is so important. Uh, and so PTSD, we're not going to talk about a lot today other than that it certainly is a risk from intensified anxiety. And there's, again, a whole field of study that will address that in more detail. So one of the characteristics of anxiety is that it does not rely on facts, and it often lies to us. So it convinces us that we are not capable of handling whatever's going on, that we have to have the right answer, that there's only one right answer, and we keep searching till we find it. This can be black and white thinking in terms of something's right or wrong versus there are nuances with regard to some of the information that we might get in terms of it applies in some circumstances or for some people, but not necessarily for everyone. And so we tend to overgeneralize. And again, we have the sense of there's only one right answer. Narrows our focus. It's very hard to see other kinds of possibilities because we get so perseverative with regard to the one thing that we're feeling. And I often use the analogy that cancer is sort of like holding your hand right up in front of your face. Initially, that's all you see. But as you progress with more time and information and understanding, that your hand comes out a little further and you get to see more of what's going on around it. So as we again lessen that anxiety, help get ourselves grounded, regulate our nervous system, we see more options and possibilities. And we also have this interesting thing that we need to worry more in terms of that's going to make things better. So we think it's going to prevent things, bad things, because we're so very prepared, we're over prepared. And then a lot of times those things don't happen. I mean, what is it that there are several phrases around that with regard to, I think Mark Twain said, most things I worried about never happened. And so the intensity of the rumination of the thoughts that continue to stream are not helpful. And so it becomes a sense of we're not able to think rationally. So we feel helpless. Again, we get immobilized by that anxiety and we don't know what to do until we think we have exactly the right answer. Now, that's not to say that we shouldn't collect some information or additional information, like a second opinion, or be able to do some of our own research to understand it. But there's, again, is the progression of how far down that rabbit hole do we want to go? And is it helpful or not? So, here's some of the things that challenge us with regard to how we move through that emotional cycle of anxiety. So, identifying what we're actually anxious about provides us information about a problem to solve, not just something to escape from. Now, that's a key point, because anxiety keeps us caught in this loop of just focusing on the problem as unsolvable rather than a sense of, oh, now I know exactly what I'm worried about. I'm worried about a recurrence. Well, if a recurrence happens, then what? Who's on my medical team? What other treatments might they be able to offer? How will they take care of me? Who's going to support me? What are my internal options with regard to taking care of myself? So now you take it from just being anxious about recurrence into, okay, what am I actually afraid of? And what can I do to help that and solve that? People will also ask about being very anxious about facing the end of their life, and they get very, very intensely distraught by that. And for all of us, we know intellectually that we're mortal, but boy, when the reality is facing us is the hardest thing. And so the sense of, okay, well, let's talk about what are you afraid of about dying? Number one thing is pain. Okay, if pain is what you're afraid of, what do you want to do with what do you want your medical team to know about how to manage it? Hospice and the palliative care folks are experts at managing pain. If you're afraid of leaving your family behind, not having enough time with them, that's very real. But again, the sense of, okay, if that is a real possibility, how do I want to prepare for that? What's the legacy I want to leave? What do I want to do? And how do I want to live before I die? So many of us get caught in this trap of seeing the end before we've actually gotten there. So it's then an option of, okay, what am I anxious about? What can I do about that? Trust is a big issue with regard to the medical system as well as ourselves. Remember, anxiety lies to us, tells us we can't handle situations when most often we really can, and we probably have proven that to ourselves in the past. And then we have the sense of we only can see what's the worst possible outcome. So then what happens is we find ourselves in this tug of war between what we hope for the best and preparing for the worst. And whichever side wins shapes our experience. So wherever we put more of our attention is going to shape our experience. Now, that doesn't mean we omit one for the other. It means we find some kind of balance. As you can see in this diagram, there's the tightness is still there, but not either side is not really pulling completely over. So we have the sense of we know the tension is there, and we are able to manage it in a way that we know we have these skills and the ability and the capacity. So the story of what we tell ourselves is a huge part of that. Again, the sense of we tend to negate the possibility that good things can happen. And allowing that possibility in a little bit more actually gives us more balance. And so we also benefit from connecting with other people who have a similar story that we can learn from each other and get some ideas and encouragement and reminders that actually give us those options. Now, of course, what doesn't happen is this rumination I was referring to, where we get so caught in the statistics or the worst case scenario that we read about, is we forget that statistics are about other people. You're still writing your story. And the other thing is statistics are usually about 4 to 5 years old. So it takes a while to compile them, publish them, all of that. And then in the meantime, there are new treatments and strategies coming up all the time. So it's a sense of, yes, we can see the trajectory of what other people have experienced. And, some of that might be true for us, but also to remember we are writing our own story in real time right now. There are a couple of books that are really interesting with regard to how people have sort of shifted that trajectory and had a better outcome might have been projected. So one of them is Cured, and the other is Radical Remission. And both of those books are collections of stories of people who have beat the odds with a serious illness. And it's a collection of what are the things that they actually did that helped them sort of shift the tide. And it's important to know that if you read those books, they're stories of other people who have tried a number of things, and the books distilled them to the top 10 things that these people have incorporated into their lives. They're not surprising overall. There are things like good nutrition, exercise, mindfulness, a variety of things that have to do with our physical well-being as well as our mental, spiritual well-being. A big thing that doesn't help also is comparing ourselves to others. We have the sense of how to be a good patient, how to be brave and get through this and not have a sense of it disrupting our life. And so we really have this sense of an expectation for ourselves, or we take it from other people, and then we decide, are we doing it right? Are we getting over it as quickly as we should? Are we managing the experience in the way that other people might think we should? Um, the other piece that sometimes is really difficult is when people finish treatment, the people around them who've been supportive just sort of fall away, like, oh, they're done, I'm done. I don't have to be present with them as much anymore. And so then we also compare the sense of, well, if you love me, you would stick around and be more invested in how I'm doing. And so we compare even the behaviors of others to what we expect. So this whole thing of comparison can really get us locked up. Of course, we talked about substance abuse, and overuse is not going to help us. It just sort of kicks the can down the road. Isolation and avoidance are not helpful either. Because they keep us stuck and don't allow us to open up, to keep our minds and hearts open to the possibility again of good things happening and being available to us and still having the opportunity to experience joy. I mean, you've seen that sign, I'm sure, is, cancer doesn't define us, that we might have cancer, but cancer doesn't have us, and how we begin to actually live out our life in a more full way. So these are some strategies that you can consider for managing anxiety and anxiety attacks, which we know can happen, and they sometimes surprise us. I had a scan done, MRI, and I was waiting for the results, and I immediately, like we humanly do, went to the worst possible outcome. Now, this was a repeat scan, so I knew what it was like the first time, and then when I had the next one, it was sort of anticipating those results. I was just beside myself, and I didn't know why. I mean, I was just really agitated. I found myself more tearful, all of those things. I didn't realize I was having a panic attack because it doesn't have to show up in the way that you might have expected or that is more obvious. So those strategies that we can use to manage that sometimes have to be inspired or prompted by other people around us. And so as we have our trusted circle of support, we might teach them some of these things so that when they see us really locked up in our anxiety, they're with us and breathing with us. Have you ever had somebody say, okay, let's breathe together, especially when they're hyperventilating? Let's just breathe together. Not just having somebody who says, get over it, take a deep breath and move on. That's not very sensitive or supportive. But the sense of people who know how to help bring in that very basic helpful skill to reconnect with our bodies, to also have a sense of relief in the parasympathetic nervous system. So this is often what helps is doing something concrete that brings us into the present, because again, anxiety is taking us back to memories of how things were before that were a threat. And so taking an opportunity where someone can coach you through, or you remember for yourself, and you might have little signs prompted to do this if you're especially struggling with anxiety, is to find 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can touch, 3 things that you can hear, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. So this again grounds you into the present moment, brings you into your body, and reminds you that you are safe in this moment. So as I said, breath work is basic. There are other techniques that are more therapeutic in nature, tapping or EFT. There are lots of videos. I have a link to one here. And it basically works with the acupressure points on our body, that when we tap them in a certain sequence and we also say an affirmation, it actually brings us into the present and also assures us that we have the capacity to deal with whatever is going on. I especially like the tapping sequence, and you don't have to necessarily have someone train you for it. There are lots of educational videos. There are some specifically for anxiety, lots out there that you can look at. Now, EMDR is not something you typically can teach yourself. It does require a coach, and it's very effective for trauma. It's called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It also has a bit of a tapping sequence from side to side in use of connecting to your body when you're feeling anxious. Again, these are techniques you want to practice when you're not anxious, because you're having to train and reprogram your neural pathways in your brain to respond to stress differently. So this is one you want to have a coach. There's another more current type of EMDR called brain spotting that actually helps you access younger memories, ones that are not sort of top of your consciousness as you think back about what are the triggers or the sources of your stress or your anxiety in particular. And again, you'll need somebody who is skilled in brain spotting and can help you do that. And there's also a video here that explains it. CBT is very commonly used with regard to managing anxiety. Remember how we were talking about how thoughts are not always really helpful? They lie to us and they misguide us. They're not based on fact. And they're not effective. You know, there are some that are not very helpful at all. They keep us stuck in the anxiety or the depressive mood. And so CBT is one of those that really examines what are those thoughts? What happened? What were we thinking when that happened? What would we do? What meaning did we give it? And what else could we say to ourselves? What else could we think that actually feels better? And so this is very effective, a very common therapy that is used. You can also go online and see a lot of the prompts and the charts that sort of take you through all of it. I think there are maybe 9 different types of unhelpful thinking patterns that it addresses. Guided mindfulness meditations. Now, a lot of people have different conceptions about what meditations are and what they can do for us. So it is now a matter of how do we find the ones that help us best. If left to our own devices, it's very, very hard just to not think about anything, right? So we tend to meander and go into past experiences or our grocery list or all the things we have to do tomorrow, whatever it might be. What is really nice about guided mindfulness meditation, again, that's one that brings us into the present and allows us to observe our thoughts and behaviors sort of as a non-judgmental observer, is that we have a sense then of somebody is actually guiding us through it. So we don't have to worry about our mind wandering as much. And I know many of you have tried guided meditations and mindfulness meditations in particular, and may have even participated in our monthly mindfulness meditation group that meets on the third Tuesday of the month in the evening from 7:30 to about 8:15. And so there are lots of videos online as well that you can participate in. There are apps that you can use, like was a happier and insight timer and a calm, a variety of those that might also be helpful. Healthy distraction, we were talking about that a little bit with regard to activities that are good for you versus racing and running away from your emotions, but allowing them an opportunity to be released. So for some people, exercise, running, or dancing, or doing something that actually moves your body and lets that energy move through. And obviously, stretching, yoga, running, dancing, any of that. Another immediate way to be able to manage a panic attack is to put your hands in cold water or splash your face with cold water, something that jars you into the present. Because again, your anxiety is based on a memory of an experience that's not necessarily in the present or doesn't fit the present as well. Or if their threat is still there, it gives you an opportunity to be able to sort of get grounded again so that you can move into the problem solving steps versus just the emotion of it. And of course, affirming self talk. And prayer is very powerful for a lot of people. It doesn't have to be an organized religion, it can be a sense of spirituality overall and trusting in something greater than yourself. So, prayer has a very positive energy for ourselves and for others. And so, that certainly is important. Uh, and this is a point, too, that I hope that you will keep in mind is, our emotions, especially around anxiety, reveal a vulnerability in us that we just don't want to be exposed. Yet it takes a lot of courage to do that, to heal that, to feel it, and still be in the present. So knowing that it is not a failing to have these emotions, it actually takes a lot of courage to be able to acknowledge them, work through them, and heal them and feel them. I was talking to my husband just today about that in the sense of, he was in the military for 20 years, and it was always about never let them see you sweat, never be vulnerable, and always be really tough and have this exterior that says, I have got it all together and I know what to do. And the sense of any kind of feeling that would reveal some vulnerability is just really foreign. And so the sense of now, where when we may have grown up in a family or an environment where it was not safe to be vulnerable, I get that. And so the sense of feeling like we have to apologize when we cry, apologize for feeling sad or scared or any of those things when we're in a position of responsibility, those things can really create another tug of war inside of us with regard to where can we feel those things safely versus I get it. There are times where we just don't want to be that exposed, but we still have to have a place where we can be. So sadness, grief, and depression. After the shock of hearing a cancer diagnosis, it's normal to feel sadness about what's been lost. Loss of well being and comfort in our body, our ability to do things we used to be able to do. And some were grieving a former version of ourselves, our bodies, and our lives and our identity. And we grieve the altered vision of what we anticipate will be the future or any additional losses we might face. However, it's important to distinguish grief from depression. These are emotions that are common that move through us in terms of short term. They come in waves, but when they become chronic and ongoing, then we're looking at something more serious. So sadness and grief, normal. That has to do with dealing with loss, but our self-esteem is still preserved. We don't see ourselves as incapable, as damaged or shameful. We have a sense of that we have both the sadness that we miss someone, but we also make room for joy and being able to experience other things in our life. So we're still moving versus depression is a different kind of experience. So anxiety is about everything matters, and depression is about nothing matters. And so we have this perceived mood where we just feel helpless and hopeless. We have no sense of things will get better. We can only see the dark cloud of it. Now, this is a physiological and an emotional experience. So I don't mean to diminish that at all. Remember how trauma affects the brain and it shrinks certain parts of the brain that are responsible for our resilience? Well, when those neural receptors get damaged, it's really hard to feel good when you're feeling bad. So the sense of then what do you do with that is going to require probably some supportive therapy, as well as it might require some medication. But it has the sense of this is something to be taken very seriously. Now, this particular statistic is quite interesting in terms of the range. So, as far as for gynecologic cancer survivors, the prevalence of um, depression can be anywhere from 9 to 63%. Well, that's, I mean, it could be any of us, right? But what explains the variance are a couple things: the age, gender, socioeconomic status, whether there's a family history of cancer where we're relating our cancer to someone else's cancer that we loved and lost, our own cancer stage type, the treatments we experience, the number of surgeries we may have had to undergo, recurrences, other health issues. So this variance really depends on a lot of things. So when you read the research, you'll see who the population is that they study. And that will give you a better understanding about whether these were folks who had a lot of these things going on, or whether or not they were really zeroing in or focusing in on a specific survivor that didn't have all of this going on. Of interest too is the prevalence of depression is 2 times higher for cancer survivors than it is for people who don't have a cancer history. Not surprising, actually. It's more intensive probably than other experiences, although having your house burned down or someone die tragically, those carry its own, risk of depression too, without a doubt. And of course, depression is increased when it's paired with anxiety. So you have this intensity that is going both directions and makes it very hard to function. You'll probably have heard of people who are dealing with manic depression. Times when they feel just totally energized, but not necessarily in a productive way. And then people would just really sink into the darkness of their depression. Obviously, there are lots of mental health disorders or challenges that people might have along with it. Whatever they're experiencing in their anxiety, or I'm sorry, in their cancer diagnosis, obviously that makes all of those symptoms worse. So the effects of depression are significant, and research has revealed that it reduces the volume in our brain regions. So remember, the hippocampus is the part that's involved in memory and learning. And long-term depression affects that, actually shrinks that part of our brain. Remember, it goes offline anyway when we're under a great deal of stress, but now it's been offline for so long, it's actually gotten smaller. And the amygdala, which is involved in regulating our emotions, can go either way. A lot of times it shrinks, and just in some studies they say it gets bigger because it's overactive, maybe sort of like a muscle that's overused. And then the prefrontal cortex, which is involved in decision making and executive functioning. If under sustained stress and depression, those actually get smaller. And there's a loss of synapses, the connection between the neurons in these brain areas. So that, again, it's a physiological experience, not just an emotional one, where it results in low mood, loss of interest, fatigue, difficulty concentrating, change in sleep and appetite. And what does not help in this list is not surprising either. But unfortunately, with depression, these become the norm. This becomes sort of the go to kind of behavior. Part of what's important to know is with depression, the symptoms usually need to be pervasive in terms of daily for at least 2 weeks. So when people have brief depressive moods, but then can sort of bounce back and have a sense of investing in their health and well-being again, doing things that are fun, actually able to have fun and enjoyment, that's different than prolonged depression. So I know that all of what we've talked about so far can be quite distressing to hear. So let's talk about how we can shift our focus, transform the pain, and discover our resilience again. What we know is that there's a strong link between thinking and feeling. New research has described it in this link you can see here that shows that strengthening emotional differentiation, so that's not a term that rolls off our tongue, but it has to do with being able to specific identify emotions rather than group them in sort of one vague overall term. So actually this emotional differentiation is a hidden key to resilience and mental well-being, whereas vague emotions like I'm having a bad day, or I feel bad, or I'm in a bad mood, make stress more damaging and depression more likely. So when we sort of group everything together under bad or good, it's not as helpful as when we can actually distinguish our emotions more precisely. Specifically, that we can tell the difference between frustration and guilt, sadness from shame, allowing us to actually name these feelings and distinguish them. I mean, that is the key to coping with stress and, and having a less likelihood of developing depression. You probably have seen the emotion wheel, which can be really helpful when you're not quite sure how you're feeling. You can look at that wheel, you can find them online. It's just called an emotion wheel that identifies all the different kinds of emotions, and you can kind of zero in with regard to, and it goes from how generalized to more specific. And so you get a sense of, oh, that's how I'm feeling. That's what it is. So conversely, when our emotions blur together, life's challenges hit harder and linger longer. So being unable to specifically recognize what we're feeling, like angry, sad, disappointed, anxious, comes with a psychological and a physiological cost. So having an opportunity to develop our understanding, to also learn about acceptance, being in the moment, accepting what is rather than pushing it away, trying to distract ourselves from it, in obtaining this kind of self-care and self-compassion and support that we need. All of that helps lead to our healing, transformation, and resilience. So now let's talk about how our thoughts can contribute to both exacerbating and soothing our stress. So you may have heard of the author and motivational speaker Wayne Dyer, and he once said something that really has always stuck with me. He said that when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Well, that makes sense. When you look at your life and the experiences you're having from a different perspective, and you have a sense of seeing the possibilities of good things still occurring in your life, the fact that you're still living and you're getting through whatever it is, even though it's hard, and that you have maybe a number of blessings and people in your life that are holding you in kindness and support, those kinds of things shift our sense of, oh, I can do this. So, what are you thinking? What is that internal dialogue? And how do you begin to examine whether it's helpful or not? Again, the cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, specifically addresses this and can help identify and change unhelpful thought patterns like catastrophizing, jumping to conclusions, generalizations. And some of these questions can actually begin that process with regard to, what are we assuming? What are the facts? What is the story I made up? What is the story I'm telling other people? What language am I using when I tell the story? I often hear people really make the judgment with regard to, right or wrong, which is pretty black and white, is what's helpful versus unhelpful. So right and wrong often carry a judgment, whereas what's helpful and unhelpful is about how do we find the best pathway for us to be able to get through whatever is difficult or challenging us. So coming up or arriving at a new way to think about things actually then affects the experience of how we live through this and how we see ourselves. And all of change transforms us. We can't get away from change. We're constantly evolving as human beings, and as you know, with evolution, it doesn't move backwards. So we have this sense of how do we move forwards, how are we part of that rhythm of moving through and forward. As we said, it's normal to feel anxious and depressed from time to time, but when those feelings interfere with our daily life and the lives of others, it's time to seek help. And often that means from a mental health professional. So we might find that there is a stigma to asking for help in general, but then asking for mental health help may carry yet another type of stigma that we don't allow. I mean, I have been amazed to talk to mental health professionals who won't seek mental health for themselves, psychiatrists, counselors, all of it. We think we should know better, right? If we're an expert at something, we shouldn't ever have any trouble with it. But that's not true. That is not true at all. So all of us benefit from therapy at some level, at some point in our life. Some people are in therapy for a long time. Some people are just in therapy for a few months, enough to get through a personal crisis and learn some tools. So, what does therapy do? It offers you all of these things where it's a sense of safety to be who you are, feel what you're feeling. And the part of it is the emotional first aid that it offers with regard to providing more tools to calm your nervous system, encourage you to spend time with people and pets and doing things that actually fill you up and restore wellness, give you a relief from the stress, give you examples of how things can be better than you imagine. And so it also gives you an opportunity as you reflect on your feelings is what are they telling you? And having a sense that you're not your feelings. Emotions don't define you. And so part of what happens in therapy is you get to treat your emotions like clues about what you're feeling and why, not as a problem to be solved or fixed. And emotions are like tunnels. You have to go all the way through them to complete the emotion cycle rather than get stuck in a repetitive loop of the same feelings and thought patterns that have left you feeling awful. Emotional first aid also involves setting boundaries, being able to say no. Remember, we talked about how there is this tendency for people who are focused on taking care of other people more than themselves is the sense of no, I can't do that, or no, that's not helpful for me, or this is what's helpful for me, this is what I need. And having a sense of then being able to create a sense of protection with regard to your own energy and well being. It doesn't mean to shut people out or be unkind, but to have a sense that you become a priority now and that you have a sense of knowing who you are and getting familiar with how you want to be in the world and having some choices about that. Journaling or talking about it, again, we have to process all of this in order to let our emotions move through us. It helps us name them, understand them, heal what's behind them, have a sense of a new perspective, a new way to think about things. Journaling is really nice, especially if you're feeling anxious, because what it does, it's sort of like taking a ball of yarn and it's stringing it out so that it's not all convoluted in our brain and we're sort of all disheveled in our thoughts, but that we have a sense of, oh, when we string it out in words and sentences, we have a sense of, oh, Okay, that's what's going on in my head. And we begin to see themes. We also can begin to see progression or movement in a healthier way of when we look back at maybe old entries and go, wow, I was thinking that. I don't think that way anymore. I don't believe that anymore. That's not helpful to me as it was in the past. Now I have a new way of being, new insights, new wisdom, or maybe accessing wisdom that we've sort of set aside for a while. And again, that language, what are we telling ourselves? Are we as kind and compassionate as we would be with somebody else? Or are we being especially critical of ourselves? Are we feeling lots of shame and regret? Um, I'll say a little bit about that in terms of regret is I did something I wish I hadn't. I did something that wasn't good or helpful. Shame is I'm not good. So I remember as a woman, I was applying for a job and something really hit me because when this person was asking about my family and I explained that I'm the youngest of 10 children and there's 7 years between my next oldest sibling and me. And the reason for that is my mother had multiple miscarriages and a stillborn. And so he didn't know that, but all I said is I'm the youngest and there's a 7-year gap, and he said, "Oh, you were a mistake." Wow. To hear I'm a mistake, that was devastating. I didn't realize how impactful that was, but that stuck with me in the sense of any time that I was feeling especially regretful, it moved into and triggered that shame of, oh, I'm a mistake. Not I made a mistake, but I'm a mistake. So again, getting to the sense of how are you talking to yourself? What is it revealing that needs to be healed? So emotions impact the body and drive our behaviors. And research tells us we need to allow our emotions and stress states to be felt and expressed in support. So, being with people that we're safe with in order for them to be transformed. And so, here are some important considerations as you reflect on the importance of understanding and processing your emotions and how they impact your behavior. So, our brains are built for survival, not happiness. Remember what that part of our brain and the amygdala is constantly scanning the environment of am I safe? Am I safe? And really picking up a sense of threat, whether it's real or imagined. So, in order for us to be happier, to be healthier, to be able to see things in a more optimistic, hopeful way, it takes deliberate, conscious practice. It's just not going to happen naturally like it may have happened when we were kids. And our hard feelings are more overwhelming when we have them alone. This is why support groups and networks of friends and close family connections, a close partner is so important because we need to have somebody carry that with us. It's not intended for us to be held alone. And then we benefit from talking to someone about it, someone who listens compassionately. We allow that our emotions just need to be expressed and need support. We aren't asking for solutions. We just want to be heard and validated. They provide important information about us and what we're feeling and what feels threatening and how we ask for support. But our emotions don't always tell the truth. So they're based on past perceptions and especially around anxiety. We can feel anxious and still be very safe. Medications, I'll just say this very briefly, are not always as helpful. Or let me say it this way: medications alone aren't helpful. A lot of people will say, "Oh, I take antidepressants or I'll take anti-anxiety meds, and then I'll be fine." What we know for sure is that actually talk therapy is more effective than medication alone. And the combination of them is also very effective. But there are times when the medications are not always helpful or good for us, and especially if we're on more intensive medications for mood stabilization. Long term use and then getting off of them has its own course of challenge. So you definitely want to work with an expert around that. How to build our mental strength. I know we're kind of running up against the edge of our time together, but these are some wonderful actual things you can do and shift your attention toward that will help you build your emotional strength and your resilience. So, this diagram provides effective ways to train your brain to be stronger than your emotions. Remember, you want to move from emotional reasoning where you think that just because you feel it, it's true. You're actually beginning to move to a way of thinking that allows you to regulate your emotions and your nervous system. So it's not just about positive thinking, it's about actively engaging with challenges, transforming your perspective, redefining your experience, and expanding your options for managing stress. You don't have to do the fight, flight, fawn, freeze. Uh, yeah, they will still come, but that's not what you have to rely on. That's not your go-to response. So that you're able to manage your strong emotions, you're rebuilding and reminding yourself that you have the capacity and can develop the capacity to deal with whatever stressors you encounter. So, what can you do? Calm your nervous system. We say that over and over. Our stress is felt in our body before we make sense of it. Focus on your own needs. So, remember, when we're so focused on taking care of other people than ourselves, we neglect our own needs and we don't realize that we're the ones suffering. So, that's why I love this particular little cartoon and picture. And then, of course, recognize and express our feelings. We can't control everything that happens to us, but we absolutely can decide and control how we want to respond. We have a choice. We do. We often think that when the emotions are so intense, we don't have a choice, but we do. Be kind and patient with ourselves. We have to be our best friend. We have to make ourselves a priority. I mean, we take ourselves everywhere we go, right? And so the sense of how would we take care of ourselves? We're not just dragging our body along. Our body needs us to take care of it and pay attention to it as well. Practicing gratitude, 5 things a day is really powerful. It sounds like it's kind of silly after a while when you do these lists. It's sort of like, well, I already said that. But there really is so much. I remember walking out on my deck yesterday and the sunset made the clouds really red. And I just sat there and thought, oh, it's so beautiful. And just really took it in rather than, uh, noticed it for a moment. Accepting. So there's a difference between accepting and a resigned acceptance. So accepting is in the moment. This is okay, this is happening and this is what I want to or can't do about it, versus this sort of, well, it is what it is. And we just sort of throw our hands up and say, okay, that's how it is. It's different than this conscious, in the present moment saying, I accept that this is happening in my life and there are things I could do with that are still going to help take care of me. So, what I want to leave or end with is this beautiful message with regard to when we tell ourselves that we have to be strong, is to remember this, that being strong means refusing to tolerate people and things that wound your soul. It means practicing self care and self compassion when you're hurting. It means honoring your feelings by actually allowing yourself to feel and express them. It means treating yourself with compassion and kindness, even when you feel like you don't deserve any. It means doing what makes you happy and being with people who make you feel good, regardless of outside judgments. It means asking for help when the weight of the world has become too much. It means giving yourself permission to get your needs met by setting boundaries and using your voice, advocating for yourself. It means forgiving yourself on the days that you're struggling and can't be brave. Oh, I just meant to say this. So, strength is not suffering in silence. So, we have just a few minutes left. I want to leave you with this is we all have that little person inside of us that remembers what it was like to be happy and free and safe and playful and just embracing life in the real moment. And so I love this picture of remember her. She's still in there, inside you, waiting. Let's go get her. So having that sense of how do we get back to that sense of resilience? And this is also my granddaughter Mia, who is holding a very similar pose. and is just one that really delights in the present. And I encourage that for all of you as well. So again, a lot to say today. Janine, is there anything that's coming up that I can answer in the time that we have left?
I don't have anything in the comments unless somebody wants to pop something in there quickly. I just, the only thing that kept coming to me is, I know when I got diagnosed, I was hesitant to ask for help, very hesitant, and it's been many years since I was diagnosed. But I think a overall message that rung true for me today is don't carry this alone.
Mhm.
And I really encourage all of you, if you aren't already participating in Nikki's Circle, I thought a support group was not for me. I found out that a support group was for me. Please visit our website and click on the calendar to take a look at what offerings there are there for you. Besides just support groups, there are other, if there are other workshops like this or other presentations, the monthly
Mhm.
mindfulness meditation as well. So uh, do not do not hesitate. And there was a comment that came in, can we view this again, the recording? Yes, absolutely. We will get this up on our YouTube page. There'll also be a link on our website. Jeanice will send that out to you so that you can actually, you'll see not only her presentation, but a copy of this recording will be sent to you. I think it's worth reviewing, isn't it, Jeanice?
I do too. I mean, I just as I was preparing for this, it just reminded me of so many things that I sort of knew at some level, but needed to be reminded of, and I think that's true for so many of us.
Yeah.
And I love your comment about the support groups where we think it's not for us, and yet it very much can be. Now, I know that for some folks it's not a good fit, but I remember hearing a psychiatrist who did a lot of research with breast cancer patients responding to that comment where people would say, "Oh, I'm not a support group person,"
Yeah.
and his response was, "Well, you probably didn't think you were a cancer survivor either." And so it is the sense of we sort of dismiss, again, this idea of what's okay for us when we don't really open up to the possibility that of things that might be good for us. So it's sort of keeping an open mind, keeping an open heart with regard to all of these things. Obviously, choosing. It's not easy to overcome the intensity of stress and the emotions that it brings, but it's possible. It's possible. So hard doesn't mean impossible. I think you may have seen that phrase that said, choose your hard. Being a certain way is hard, but doing something about it is hard. Choose your hard. And so the sense of you can do hard things,
Mhm.
and even though it's hard to sort of modify some of these stress responses and help support your body that's already really struggling, it's hard, but it's worth it. You're
And if
worth
it's hard today, it might not be tomorrow.
it. Yeah, yeah. So please get the support that you need. Allow yourself to be vulnerable with the emotions that you're feeling and be able to share them with individuals who are safe for you to do so. Take care and be well, dear ones. Thank you. Bye.